So right here, this would be fiber, the part of plants that is resistant to being digested. And the different types of fiber, you got cellulose, which is in the cell wall, which we see when we look at the red onion cells under the microscope. And there's another type of compound called lignin, which the xylem, those are like the blood vessels of the plant that carry water. And if you eat celery, you know, those strings in celery, that's lignin. It's very tough. If you are familiar with balsa wood, if you have balsa wood, there's some darker strands going through it. That's the lignin. That's the good strong stuff. And then pectin here, that's if you eat a pear, you notice the little granules, the little bits and little chunks kind of feel like they're crunchy. That's pectin. And there's other things we need to look at. Excretory products, bilirubin, which comes from red blood cells. So your body, the red blood cells last around 90 days. Then they need to be released. They're not working too well anymore, and they go out through your liver and bile. You also have a lot of water from saliva and from the stomach and small intestine, digestive enzymes, acid, and those are all water-based. So all those materials, all those enzymes that you're using to digest your food, mostly filled with water, mostly made out of water, you want to get that back. So your large intestine will get that back. So we call this feces, anything undigested, unabsorbed water. And the word egest is something you need to be familiar with. It means to carry outside. Outside. And this is a diagram. I think it's a nice little diagram for you to practice, just to get the basics of what's happening. Got your digestive tract here. You're eating. This is my version of an apple. Through your mouth, you're ingesting, you're digesting it. All the acid, the juices, and the nutrients are getting absorbed in your bloodstream, going to your liver, or directly to the bloodstream if it's fats. Anything waste will go out your anus. That's called egestion. And you have accessory, we'll say, organs here, which your liver, gallbladder, pancreas, salivary glands, adding different things, enzymes. Pancreas and salivary glands are adding enzymes. Gallbladder is adding bile, so enzymes. Liver, making the bile, then added, then everything coming out. Remember, RBCs, red blood cells, that's what makes the poop brown. It would be brown without those messed or broken down red blood cells. So very cool. Well, depends on how you look at it, but a lot of drugs came out in the 80s and 90s for people that were having problems with indigestion, trying to reduce stomach acid secretion, or having troubles with ulcers, and we'll get to that. It used to be thought of too acidic, but we'll get to what causes ulcers in a second. But these are called drugs, a class of drugs that inhibit the production of acid by cells in the gastric pits. Proton pump inhibitors, so PPIs. That might come up on the exam, so you want to know what those PPIs are. But they bind to this pump that pumps hydrogen. So if no pump, no hydrogen. So reduces acid by those proton pump inhibitors. So it breaks the pumps, but your body is always good at rebuilding stuff that's broken. So acid's a big issue. We see a lot of, those Tums commercials on TV. So you're used to seeing antacids advertised on TV. There's also some other ones called just hydrogen blockers. So blocks the body's signal to produce acid. And then these others that we mentioned, PPIs, that's an I, that blocks the secretion of acid. So increasingly more serious and more side effects as you go from using Tums, Mylanta. You may have heard of Zantac, and you probably heard of Prilosec. They have the ads on TV with those. Okay, so cholera, something you've heard of, used to be a really major problem. It comes from dirty water, basically human waste mixing with the fresh water. So it doesn't happen too much in places with, decent infrastructure, decent fresh water supply, decent sewers. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, or places now that have interruptions to their infrastructure, they face this issue with cholera. What happens is this cholera, this is the bacteria you might recognize with the little tail there, and creates that toxin, and it creates a situation where a lot of these ions are pumped out: sodium, potassium, chloride, bicarbonate. What that does, by having all of these ions outside the digestive, so this is your blood, this is your digestive tract. Okay, so you have all these ions being pumped out. That creates a whole bunch of water going out into your large intestine, and then your body just has to get rid of it. It's just building up. So that's what causes the diarrhea. The cholera, pumping out these ions. And we know wherever water always wants to balance things out, so water is trying to balance this. It says, oh, there's all these ions outside. I need to go out there to reduce that concentration gradient to balance it out. Problem is, it could potentially kill you because it's going to make you extremely dehydrated. And we need to think about international mindedness. There has been a big cholera outbreak. You may or may not, depending on how much you pay attention to international issues. In 2011, just to do a short story on what happened here, there was a change of power in Yemen, and the Saudis really didn't like it, and it wasn't quite on the up and up, and the Saudis were able to get, the Saudi government was able to get the UN, the United Nations, UN, to agree to do an action. And since we're part of the UN, a lot of our airplanes and equipment, not our airplane, but our equipment, has gone to bombing targets in Yemen. There's a naval blockade. And Yemen is a very poor country. So once you start doing those things, once you start breaking down their infrastructure and preventing clean food supplies and water supplies from entering Yemen, it can cause big problems. And we can see there's been a huge issue with cholera because of that. Most likely it was probably the power plants broke down, the sewers weren't working, and you had a mixing of fresh water and the wastewater. And unfortunately, older people, especially children, are the most likely to die. So it's a real serious situation going on almost 10 years. So, we need to be aware of those things. And maybe if we do global politics, we'll get into that. So what causes ulcers is bacteria. So bacteria causes ulcers. About 80% of ulcers are caused by bacteria. So we can kind of check that out. Here's our Helicobacter pylori. This is gastric fluid, your normal fluid that's very acidic. And this is mucus, a mucus layer, that purple. And then you have your epithelial cells. So the Helicobacter burrows down in this mucus, And what it does is start to make this enzyme called urease. What that enzyme does, it breaks down the mucus. Breaks down mucus until you get this giant hole right here. Okay, so this is damage from bacterial enzyme. And then you get this hole. Acid can then go in and attack, damage, inflame the tissue. And normally, these epithelial tissues, these enterocytes, are protected by that mucus layer, but they're not protected anymore, and they get damaged. So this issue with conservatism really affected ulcers. So we knew about ulcers in the 1980s, so early, but it took over about 10 to 15 years to get doctors, scientists to prescribe, to recommend and prescribe antibiotics for ulcers. So in science, it's conservative. They don't want to change their paradigm on a dime. There's one study that comes out. They want to see more and more evidence, and that's good in a way. So it's good, okay, because you don't just switch ideas willy-nilly all the time. But it's bad because let's see, good. So I'll say it's good because you want evidence, right? You want a lot of quality evidence. It's bad sometimes. Evidence is weak because people haven't believed in it, so they're not going to pay for it. Evidence is weak. There's lack of research money. Lack of research money, so it takes a while to build up because the people who fund these studies, they'd rather fund something that's already making them money than try something new that's unproven that may lead to nothing. So they'll usually stick with what they already know, and that can be a problem. You can stick with something that works okay instead of actually curing it, because you're looking at just something that is already making the money. You will need to identify the difference between epithelial cells and exocrine glands. So if you look at this schematic, your exocrine cells have an area where there's kind of a hollow. So I always think there's hollow inside, and then a duct. So if you look at this diagram, you see the duct right here, and it's empty in here. And if you cross it transversely, you'll see that that empty space on the inside and that kind of circular structure here. So this would be, exocrine gland. And if you look at something like this, you don't see any hole, you don't see, an empty space. You just see these tightly packed structures going up and down, and those are villi. So you won't see, again, the tip-off is you're not going to see that empty side. And this one is a little more difficult, but you can see this empty space here and an area here where it can be made. So this is exocrine. And here you can see, it's a little different, but you can see the villi. And this can kind of look like an exocrine, right? But you have to recognize, you have these repeating structures. Okay, so this is villi. So just practice those so you won't be surprised.